One day, when I was riding my horse through the forest, I came across that woman. She had fallen from her horse and was slightly injured. Something inside of me said, "Now you can have your revenge. Kill her, and nobody will know who did it, or violate her, so she will fall into great despair." I stood there wavering and was about to kill her when the words came into my mind, "The laws of men do not always provide justice, but the universe never fails to do so." And then I heard the words, "You should not be the cause of suffering, because then you will incur a debt." I stopped as if paralyzed when those words emerged in my mind. After wavering for a few more moments, I helped the woman back into her horse, and then I rode away. My anger over my sister's death dissolved. So before we move into a discussion of the complex law of cause and effect, the question was raised as to what is the archetype of Sita for us today? What are the messages from Sita? What is the archetype of the feminine that she manifests? Does anybody want to open the discussion? I only read brief sections from the untold story of Sita, but in my mind, there were several very powerful messages that came through. One was the ecological message of needing to regain our relationship with the natural world, with all of the natural world, with the soil, with the animals, with the plants. There are many stories in the book of her speaking with the plants, of learning from the plants teaching her. And another message that I came through very strongly is feeding people. That comes up again and again in Sita's travels through the jungles and all of that, feeding people. Food was medicine. In those days, food was pure, and there was so much natural variety. And so the food was medicine. The many stories in the book about if somebody was disturbed, Sita would know what foods to cook for them to help calm their emotions. And so the understanding of the role of food, it's, now we eat unconsciously pretty much. And the food we eat is so far, far away from the natural food. So much of it is processed that we've lost that connection with the earth from where the food comes. And so the many ways to reconnect with the earth, one being food. That's one of the strong messages. And the other message is the strength of Sita. So when we're talking about the archetype of the feminine, she's a manifestation of that strength, the Shakti, where she decides to go into Lanka. This whole idea of the kidnapping, she allows herself to be taken into Lanka to do the work that needs to be done. Most of you know that story, where she's taken into Lanka, and that leads to the war. The other thing that was interesting is that there was a drought at that time. Early in Sita's life, there was a drought. And the question is why? This is Treta Yuga. But in every yuga, there are challenges. It's maybe fewer in the higher yugas. But the drought gave her father, Janak Baba, the opportunity to develop new methods of farming. He developed the plow. He developed irrigation. He was able to use that challenge to come up with new ways of doing things. And so that applies to us now. We are facing droughts and floods. So are we going to use that opportunity to come up with new ways of working with nature? And it says early in the book when when the drought is there, that the river spoke to him and said, "Use my water to irrigate the fields." And that's when he comes up with this system of irrigation for the farms. But the other message that comes through is he was a ruler who knew everybody and sat with everybody and helped them solve their problem. So the idea of the noble ruler is one who's truly a servant and is there to help people solve their challenges in life. You think how far we've come from that ideal. So, I mean, even though we're a much larger human population, the general concept could manifest in a noble character, noble statesman-like character. So we've moved far away from that. But Sita's strength in going into this demonic kingdom alone and dealing with this, all the demonic energies that are attacking her, is a model for all of us, because we ourselves have to be in environments that are not pleasant. They may not be demonic kingdoms per se, but there could be negative environments. And how are we going to react to those negative environments? There are lessons on how to do that, and there are many lessons there of how Sita had to build around herself a protection so that she wouldn't be overcome by these cities, because Ravana had a lot of mental power and could create illusions. And she couldn't eat or drink because food would be tainted, and he would, like today we might say, drugs put into the food or to the water. And so she had to be on guard for the full time that she was there. So there are many, many stories in there that apply to us today about the ideal of the feminine. Now I want to turn to what is considered to be the next incarnation of Sita, which is Rukmini. It's a different
Dimuma,
time.
before that, a couple of things on the Sita I'd
Yeah.
love for you to talk about. One is this thing that she was the daughter of the earth, Prithvi,
Yeah.
and that she was found in a cleft, and therefore Sita, right? And it's interesting that as we look to redefine or reinvent or remythologize her for this time, it's not only is the story being set right, but it's also being elevated to create a larger myth, which could be the saving of the planet itself, because that's what she represents now, right? So
Yeah.
could you speak to that?
Well, the way I understand it, she was, and this has happened in times, she was a self-manifesting. She self-manifested. And there have been other beings who have self-manifested, other great yogis who have just appeared. They didn't go through the normal birthing process, they just appeared. She appeared as an infant in the most drought-ridden part of the kingdom. And when she appeared, the rain came. So her relationship, and this is why it was said that King Janak Baba, was doing pujas for a daughter, and that's contrary to what most people believe. You ask for a son, especially if you have no children and you're a king. And so some of the sages came to him and said, "Why aren't you praying for a son to continue your lineage?" And he said, "Kingdoms come and go. I'm concerned about the well-being of the earth. And so we need the supreme Shakti herself to come." That's a powerful statement, because we're in a similar situation today when the earth is in danger. And what is needed? It's the divine feminine energy that's needed. One of you mentioned how when you meet with NGOs, there's so many women working on the ground. But when you meet with decision makers at all levels in business and government, there are very few women. That's still true today. That's still true today. And we have to have, it takes time for deep systemic change to take place. There could be token changes, but for deep systemic change to take place, it takes time. And so it's the lifetime of it's the work of all of us over multiple lifetimes. The character of, is there anything else you want to say about Sita?
Could you speak to the Gurukulam for girls? Because this Integral Yogini TTC is kind of inspired after having read that book as well. So the Gurukulam for girls, that was her vision.
Yes. So when Ram and Sita were on Earth, the Gurukulams were being set up. They were the first schools to pass down the knowledge of the Vedas, because the Vedas had been kept alive through oral transmission. But how there was the possibility they would disappear. So you needed to have places where you could train people. with that knowledge, to keep the knowledge alive. And one of the reasons for Sita and Ram's exile through the south was to help clear out the Rakshakshas, the cannibal tribes, because they were endangering the gurukulams that were being set up. Some of the sages were moving down to the south, setting up ashrams and bringing in students, mostly men at that time, and they were being threatened by these unruly tribes. And so that was part of the work of Ram and Sita, was to protect these gurukulams that were being set up. When they came back to Ayodhya, Sita had wanted to set up a gurukulam for girls, which was a novel idea. Because don't forget, the institutions of society were just being established during this time. And the first thought was that the men who had been leading, I suppose, were going to lead the ashrams. And she was able to set up, I think it may have happened after she had departed, but a gurukulam for girls was set up. And from there, at that time, there were gurukulams for girls. Eventually they disappeared. But the women, the young girls, were trained in the spiritual knowledge at that time. And it is time to revive that, spiritual training places for women, for girls and for women of all ages, to be able to access the higher knowledge.
Detachment that she has towards her children while bringing them up, knowing that someday they're going to go away. And she never badmouths Rama anytime at all while she's bringing them up.
Sita's departure, so that's an important event that we didn't discuss because I couldn't go into the whole book on Sita. But there are two, in my mind, misconceptions. One is that she was kidnapped against her will and taken into Lanka. When she's Narayani, nothing happens against her will. And the other is that Ram sends her away. There was an ancient curse placed on Narayan. And it was the time, it's explained in the book, there was a time when, it's a complicated story, the Devas and the Asuras were in battle. Forces of dark and light were in battle. Narayani had taken birth as the daughter of Brigu. And Brigu was the one who brought the knowledge of astrology to the humanity. And she was a critical part of bringing that knowledge to him. When she took birth, I mean, Brigu was in the celestial realm. He saw how beautiful she was, and he asked her to take birth as his daughter. And she said, okay. And Narayan, Vishnu, said, I'll come get you when it's time for you to return. So she comes down and she works with Brigu and brings that knowledge down to earth of astrology and astronomy. And then the time's coming for her departure. Meanwhile, Brigu had two wives. One of the wives gave birth to Shukracharya, who was the guru of the Asuras, the unruly crowd, so to speak. And in this battle, some of the Asuras, the demons, go and take refuge with her and say, protect us, we're the students of your husband. And she says, okay, you're my protection. The Devas come and say to her, let us in. They're causing havoc in the world. We've got to get rid of them. And she says, I've given my word to protect them. I can't let you in. Narayan, Vishnu, is on his way to bring his wife back to the heavens, and he hears this. And he says to her, you've got to let the gods in. These guys are creating chaos on the earth. You've got to let them do their job. She says, I can't. I've given my word. What am I to do? And he says, yes, it's important to keep your word, but on the other hand, it's a graver offense to let the Asuras get away with this. They've had murders and all kinds of stuff. They've murdered people. And so she says, well, I'm in a dilemma. Please take me. It's time for me to leave my body. I'd rather leave my body than go back against my word or prevent the Devas from doing their work. He takes her. At that moment, Brigu comes back and he sees his wife lying dead. And without asking any questions, he curses the one who killed his wife and says, let you know what it's like to be separated from your wife. You will know what it's like. And then Narayan, Vishnu steps out of the shadows and he says, I accept that curse. I accept that. And Bhrigu's horrified. He said, oh, Lord, I didn't mean to curse you. I didn't know it was you. He says, a rishi's word cannot be undone. And at that moment, he takes Narayani, who was born as the daughter, Bhargavi, her name was, back to the celestial realm. And Bhrigu is distraught. Rishi Bhrigu is distraught, what he had done. So there's a part in the Sita book, after Sita returns from Lanka and she's pregnant and everything is fine, she's back, she has a dream remembering that time. And she goes to seek out the women rishis. And they say to her, the first wife of Bhrigu, he had two wives. This was the second wife who had that problem. The first wife, Kyati, had weakened the curse and said it will be a partial separation. And so they realized that Bhrigu cannot be liberated until that curse is fulfilled. For the liberation of this rishi, they have to fulfill that. And so Ram and Sita agree that she will go to the forest with the children. But it's a partial separation, so you'll see, he visits her. He visits her, he comes when he can. Some people say she never left Ayodhya because she's there during important meetings. So and there were many reasons that she wanted to raise her sons the way she grew up in the forest and not to have the restrictions of the palace. So it worked out, and then there's a point when she knows her time is near, because that's another story. During the Great War with Lanka, Lakshman was injured. You all know that, with a poisonous arrow. And Hanuman was sent to find the remedy for that, but it was far away. Whether he would survive the night, there was a question whether he would survive the night until Hanuman returned. And Sita was taken out of her body, she's sitting in Lanka, and engaged in a battle with the Lord of Death, Yama. She wouldn't let Yama, she said, you will not touch him. She was keeping him alive until Hanuman came back with the medicine. And Lord Yama said, you'll have to give me some of your years if you want. It's his time to die. You'll have to give me some of your years if you want to extend his life. And she did. And so she's in the forest, and she realizes that now is her time to leave. But she's waiting for Bhrigu to achieve liberation. He went off to meditate, feeling so bad that he had cursed his Lord. She sees the stellar configurations, and she sees that he's achieved liberation. He and his wife Kyati have been liberated. And then she knows that her time has come. And there's a beautiful moment when Ram comes and sees her off into the celestial world. And so this misunderstanding that Ram banished Sita is a grave error, because he is the manifestation of Dharma. So a man of Dharma would not banish his pregnant wife who has just gone through an ordeal. That's inconceivable for anybody. And so that came in later. And scholars I know say, yeah, the meter is different. It was written later. My question is, why? Why was that added later? Because society at that time, it could have been 1,000 years later, 2,000 years later, when it got written down, because it was oral, the story was oral for so long. They wanted to give a message to women. Even if you're the purest woman, if you stay away from your husband, you will be punished. That's the message society wanted to give. And so they added that khanda, that section. And that needs to be undone, because if we know Ram to be a man of Dharma, obviously, he set up the whole foundation of society based on that, then he would never do that. But there was this ancient curse, and part of Sita's work in the world was to end these time of curses. We see again and again, initially, there was no justice system. There were no judges, no courts. I mean, in the higher ages, you didn't need that. But the rishis had the power to administer justice. You did wrong, you could be cursed. They could bless and they could curse. But over time, their personal emotions came into it, and it was misused. And Sita saw the misuse of these curses. And so she sought to end the time of curse. And working with Ram, he set up the earliest justice systems, of what was the punishment of different offenses. There are examples of that in the book, of her standing in the way, stopping a curse when it was about to be ushered, and Ram administering the justice. It was a time of many changes in society. And so for us to move forward, for the divine Shakti to come forward, we have to read that story. We have to go back to the origins of that story and see it for what it was, and not accept the patriarchal interpretations. I think that's essential. And that's why the story of Sita is so important, because it's foundational for this part of the world, for India. It's a foundational story. And yet it's been misleading. And when we reject those misleading parts, we see how beautiful the whole story is. The love that held them together, how they worked, complete harmony. I mean, going to the forest was in many ways a blessing for Sita. She accepted it because she could raise her children in freedom to roam around. I mean, that's how she grew up, in the forest. Yeah. So now we come to Rukmini before we get to karma, because the story I want to read is a story about karma. So Rukmini is born several thousand years later, the wife of Krishna. Society's in a totally different state. The status of women has totally changed. And she's a rather rebellious one, very feisty. I love her character. She's locked in her palace. She's the princess. She sneaks out. She goes to listen to the musicians. She goes to see the artists. She goes to see the jewelers. She goes to see the dancers. She's part of bringing art to society, because as the spiritual knowledge is declining, how are we going to access the higher realms? Through the arts. And you see, in the successive ages, art becomes very important. And it becomes a way of communicating with the spiritual realms. And so that was part of her focus, as well as to defend the status of women. She sets up probably the first place of refuge for women who have been abused and mistreated. But I want to read a story that continues a story begun in the era of Sita. During Sita's time, toward the end of her life, there's a young woman and her mother who are coming to the hermitage, the guru, where she was living nearby, to get a blessing for the young girl's marriage. The chariot is attacked, and the young woman is raped. And she's carried into Sita's home. Now, the men had some kind of grudge against her father, so they did it not out of lust, but out of a grudge. Sita heals the young girl and suppresses the memory so that she can get married and have a normal life. So let's see what happens to that woman. Clearly, the story's not over. So this book is told, the Sita book is told through the voice of a servant. This book is told through the voice of a dancer in Dwarka, where Krishna and Rukmini live. But Rukmini came from another kingdom, Vidarbha. And this young woman, Malini her name is visiting the seer of Vidarbha, an old woman from Vidarbha who's come to Dwarka because her daughter lives there. And she's recounting stories about Rukmini that she knew from Rukmini's childhood. So she says, they call her Dadi because she's an old lady. And so this dancer comes with her boyfriend, and they're visiting Dadi. And she hadn't seen Dadi in a long time. Dadi received us warmly. Her face was no more lined than when I had last seen her, some years earlier, because there was no more space on her face for new lines to be drawn. But her steps were slower, her figure more bent. After we were seated, Uddhav, that's her beloved, her boyfriend, asked how she had first met Rukmini Devi. My meeting with her goes far back in time. Do you want to hear the beginning of that story? Uddhav nodded eagerly. Well, It began many lifetimes ago during the time of Sita Ma. I was a young girl preparing for my marriage ceremony when my mother took me to get the blessing of our Gurudev. His hermitage was the one where Sita Ma was living when she retreated to the forest to raise her children. Before we reached the hermitage, our chariot was attacked by men with a grudge against my father. My mother and I were injured, and we were carried to Sita Ma's cottage, where she healed us both. At that time, she suppressed the memory of what had happened to me. Dadi paused briefly, and her eyes clouded over, as if recalling that incident, and then she began again. I had been severely injured, violated multiple times, and would have died had Sita Ma not healed me. Had she not suppressed my memory of that horrible event, I would have taken my life in despair. But she did heal me, and I married and had children and a happy life. I visited Sita Ma again before she left her body. I asked her what had truly happened to me during that roadside accident. She did not tell me all the details, but she revealed that I had been gravely injured. Then she said, "There are the laws of men and the laws of the universe. The laws of men do not always provide justice, but the universe never fails to do so. Trust in that. No person can escape their due, but you should not be the cause of their suffering, because then you will incur a debt and the cycle will continue." Her words sank deep into my mind. I lived the rest of my life well and then died. After a few more lives, I took birth as a man. There was a family that created much trouble for my family. One of the daughters of this family caused the death of my sister. This woman was spiteful and mean, and had been very envious of that sister, with whom I was close. Her death was very painful for me. One day, when I was riding my horse through the forest, I came across that woman. She had fallen from her horse and was slightly injured. Something inside of me said, "Now you can have your revenge. Kill her, and nobody will know who did it, or violate her, so she will fall into great despair." I stood there wavering and was about to kill her when the words came into my mind, "The laws of men do not always provide justice, but the universe never fails to do so." And then I heard the words, "You should not be the cause of suffering, because then you will incur a debt." I stopped as if paralyzed when those words emerged in my mind. After wavering for a few more moments, I helped the woman back into her horse, and then I rode away. My anger over my sister's death dissolved. This woman, who he wanted to kill, had much pain in her later years, but it wasn't because of anything I did. I was spared from committing a terrible deed for which I would have had to pay a price. Sita Ma's words had sunk deep into my mind, and I had carried this teaching into my succeeding births. Now I come to my current life. In my early years growing up in Vidarbha, I was friends with the daughter of a family who lived close to us. We lived in the community of gem carvers and jewelry makers. This girl had a harder life than I. She had a disability, but she was very kind to me and was always seeking to help me in any way she could. We grew up, we each got married, and remained friends, raising our children together, and she continued to assist me with anything I needed. If I wanted something from the market, she would insist on doing the errand for me. This is how my friend was, always looking to see what she could do for me. I had reached middle age when our young Rajkumari came to see the jewelry makers in Vidarbha, and it was then that I met her for the first time. My sight had already opened, and I was seeing many things about people. When our Rajkumari came to visit, my friend was there as well, and the young Raj Rukmini watched as I chatted with this woman, who had been my close companion since childhood. She watched as my friend insisted on serving us tea and snacks she had made, and kept asking if there's anything more she could do. I was even a bit embarrassed that she served me so ardently. At one point, our Raj Kumari asked to see me alone outside, and as we sat together, she broke into joyous laughter. Then she whispered to me, "I am so glad to see this friendship now. All has finally been resolved." At her words, my memory awakened, and I saw that this woman, who was my dearest friend, had been one of the two men long ago who had violated me, and also the one I had nearly killed in a subsequent life. I almost fainted from shock. Because I had refrained from killing that woman, and because that person fully regretted the violence committed against me in an earlier birth, she was drawn to be born near me and seek my friendship now. Our Raj Kumari then spoke the same words that Sita Ma had spoken to me about justice. I know she had transformed the soul and turned a mean-spirited being into a very kind and caring one. Whether we call her Sita or Rukmini, it doesn't matter. She is the Supreme Mother who watches over and silently guides her children. You see, we all play so many roles during our many lifetimes. Sometimes we are the hero, sometimes the villain. We mustn't hold onto anger or judgment because the person we hate may be our savior in a future life. That is how karma unfolds.
Thank you for sharing that, because as we absorb it, I was remembering your story that your daughter murdered you in a past life. And this. Would you like to speak to that, or would anyone like to relate to what you just heard? Because before this session, we had Anuradha Ramesh on karma and ancestral. It was incredible how it all
Came
spoke.
together. Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, so I wonder what the group is feeling, or any comments. Do you relate to the story in any way? That
There is a very deep part of me that knows that, you know, um, but there's all these other feelings sometimes that just appear, and just to remind myself of that essence that, everything will resolve, like you said. Um, just gives me this space of, I don't know, centeredness, and just, open my heart to her, and just having that good intention and see how it unfolds. But I trust that it will resolve.
Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment about that? I have in my own life have seen how many conditions have been worked out, many karmic threads from the past. I talked earlier about my own the anger that I was carrying toward the destruction of the temples here in India a few hundred years ago, and so many people are not interested in the past. Why are you mourning over something that happened 300 years ago? Because we still hold that pain, and rather than acting it out, and I've written about this, and I've said we can't. Okay, there was a lot of destruction of the temples. Some of us have memory and pain around that. Just talking about now about India. But it's wrong to blame the Muslims of today because may have been the Hindus of yesterday. I've had this experience also because my organization has done a lot of work in conflict areas, Israelis, Palestinians, Iraqis, Afghanis, and it's like you don't until you can see a master can see the history of everybody. Until you really can see the history, it's very hard to make a judgment. I mean, this should help us move beyond judgment, because the bigger issue facing us as a world community is how we can overcome our collective karma, our collective pain, our collective trauma. And every nation seems to be going through that now. It's almost as if it's all bubbling up now. things that may have been suppressed for many years is bubbling up because they have to be dealt with. For us to move on as a human community, we've got to address these things that are still holding us back, the pains of the past. And so how to do that? I mean, my conclusion is you have to do it individually, and each little piece that gets healed leads to a bigger collective that is releasing. Because what we need to do is release things that we're holding on to. Behavioral patterns, mind patterns, pain, anger. We all hold these from our past experiences. And we have to, if we don't release them, they'll impede us. So the work is to release them. And there are many spiritual practices that can help with that. But also deep reflection and looking at our life carefully and see what are the emotions that we're dealing with now. Does anybody else want to share?
I'm not Jewish, but I learn a little bit about Judaism, and I know there's a holiday or a special holy day that's really emphasizes forgiveness, right? Is that
I couldn't get
forgiveness? Which day is that? Do you know? I don't. Well, anyway, I just always thought that like that is sort of the way out of samsara, is through forgiveness. Because if we forgive, then we don't have to let that karmic cycle keep going. So
yeah. Coming to, I think that's part of the process of letting go of the anger or the hurt. Sometimes it manifests as anger, pain, hurt. Is knowing that the person that you're holding something against or the event, everything will balance itself. So what is the law of karma? It's not a system of reward and punishment. It's really a rebalancing. The universe is always seeking balance. And every thought has an energy. Every action has an energy. Speech has an energy. We're constantly putting things out there that they have a life of their own. And so they need to be rebalanced. And karma is a very complex process. The process of rebalancing. It's not tit for tat. And I think many people mistake it as a system of reward and punishment. If you do this, something is going to happen to you. It's a process of awakening, of learning. If you commit an adharmic act, the soul wants to correct that. The soul wants to be in harmony with the laws of the universe. So the soul will attract to itself things that can help it move to a higher state. So it's our own desire for awakening that attracts conditions to us that can help us compensate for hurts and pains that we've caused. There's no external force that's punishing us. You did this, you killed somebody, you got to be killed. It doesn't work that way. But it's you did an act that caused suffering. How are you going to wake up from that so that you don't do that again? And if you see that, if you have an experience that you realize that someone else has caused you suffering, and that's not something you want to be part of in the future, you've woken up from that pattern of behavior.
As I was listening to you now, I thought about also the whole, not just on the individual level, but on the world level, because it set me thinking about my country now, and I'm from Sweden, and what we are going through. Our society has shifted radically. We were very homogeneous and very peaceful, and now we have shootings basically every day now because of the shift with immigration and everything. And then it brought me back to the Viking times when we were actually heavily moving in big parts of Europe. Very, very scary, no? And then it brought me to think about colonialism. And then you were speaking further about the fact that it's not a tit-for-tat situation, but it's a situation where we need to acknowledge We need to become aware, and we need to acknowledge, and by acknowledging and not justifying anything, things will shift and have to shift, no? Because we all have, everybody has patterns of this, whichever country you're born in, whichever nationality. We have been in so many lifetimes in so many places that we have all done these things, and we all carry the threads of it, no? And I also think that this is part of our issues in Oroville right now. We have been so vested in human unity, in the ideals of human unity, that we cannot see and acknowledge that we ourselves carry these things, and that is a big part of our problem, no? Because when we recognize, I've been in a situation myself when I have years ago recognized something in me which I had not, would never have acknowledged if somebody told it to me, and then I saw it, and it was a big shock because I worked for human unity so long, no? And then I saw, hey, that is there in me, and with that knowledge, something shifted big time, no? So I think that we really need to work on that, whichever field it is, whether it's sexism or racism or colonialism, slavery as trafficking, it's all going on, no? That this acknowledgement and the stop of justification is extremely important, that it's not a tit for tat issue. I love that you said that.
You know, the US is now suffering from many mass shootings, and the latest development is mass shootings in the schools, which is hitting people at a whole different level, right? I see it as the karmic return for a lot of violence that we've committed elsewhere. In Iraq, many children were killed, but it was their children, not our children. Now our children are being killed. And so I mean, we can't not see the karmic causes of this. Obviously, if we're committing violence elsewhere, it's going to come back to us in some way. And now it's coming back to us by our own people. No outside force is doing it to us. The killing is happening within our own communities. And yet people are not seeing, they're not connecting the dots. They're not seeing, this is, hey guys, this is the return for actions we have taken. And yeah, we need to speak up more about that. I need to speak up about that at home, but it's like a block. It's like, huh? It's difficult in your, yeah. Yeah. Everything that comes to us has an earlier cause, but so many people use that as an excuse. Oh, it's just karma. Well, your karma could be to overcome that, to correct that, not just to accept it. I think that it's a matter of awakening the will, and we're called to action. I mean, that's Krishna's call is to action. He didn't say, well, you know, to the Pandavas, well, it's your karma. They have the kingdom, just give it up to them. He said, go and fight because it's the right thing to do. And it's tricky because your intentions have to be pure. The Pandavas were not fighting out of greed for a kingdom. They didn't really care about the land. They were fighting because of all the misery that was being caused by the other side, the oppression and the behavior and the actions that were causing human suffering. So I think that we can accept that whatever comes to us is karma, because that's important. You know, people, we have to outgrow blaming it on some external condition and know that we are responsible for our conditions, whatever they may be. But that doesn't mean that we don't act and that we don't try to change our situation, because that's the divine in us calling us to evolve and to move forward and to correct the imbalances. And so, you know, it may be that you have a desire for something. You know, it's my karma, I can't get it. There's no guarantee you're going to get that in your life. You want a beautiful relationship, you want to be the head of a company, but you'll get it at some time. You'll get it at some time if that desire is strong in you, and if you work toward it, it will come to you at some point. And you can get closer to it in this life. And so the call to action and to awakening the willpower is as important as accepting that your conditions have been created by your actions of the past, your actions, your thoughts, your desires of the past, whatever it was, whatever your conditions are, your family situation. It's the right situation for you to take the next step for your growth. Whatever comes to you is the best condition for you to grow, to learn whatever lessons. We each come in to our life with certain lessons to learn that we set for ourselves. And we create the conditions that we can learn those lessons. And if we don't learn them, then we have another opportunity to do it. But if we do learn the lessons, then we move on and we'll create a new set of circumstances that could help us take a step further.
I have two questions, and it's related to. I found myself in a emotionally abusive relationship a few years ago, and I thought about it back then as like I attracted that situation as a means for consciousness elevation rather than like post karma. And you mentioned something that we draw situations to us as a desire for awakening. So yeah, I had a question around that. The situations that comes to us in terms of had I done something to him then, like in a previous life, or yeah, how those two go together, if it makes sense.
I think both are true. Your karma, your past with this person led you to connect again, and maybe to give you an opportunity to develop the strength to get out of that relationship. I don't know what your past relationship was with that person, but did you get out of the relationship?
Yeah, I did. And a continuing question there is like, I still feel fear in this, like in that constellation. And like, does that mean that I haven't completed the cycle for healing that relationship? Yeah, that's my second
You
question.
know, the fact that you got out of the relationship shows that you had the strength to finish it. The fear, you have to face your fear and look within and find out what are you afraid of? Are you afraid of getting into another abusive relationship? Are you afraid that he will come after you? What is the fear? What is the cause of the fear?
Mm, no, my own security, I would say. Yeah,
What's that?
my own security.
Your own insecurity. So that's what you have to work on. You have to work on having confidence in yourself and knowing that, calling upon whomever you need to help you develop that inner strength. So part of the work is done, but there's more work that remains until you can overcome, until you develop the inner awareness, the inner strength that you don't have fear anymore.
Makes sense. Thank you.
I know there are many causes for disease, but is also one of the biggest cause karmic? Yeah.
Disease. I mean, disease is karmic. It can come from so many different sources. It can come from environmental factors, eating habits, genetic factors, but we choose to come into a particular family with a genetic makeup. And each person has a different story. So for each person, it's different. What is the karmic cause for that? I know that for many, in Western medicine, we deal with the symptoms. If you have a disease, we'll take care of the symptoms, not the causes, because they could be emotional causes too. When we have emotional upsets, it manifests in the body. Mind and body are so connected. So somebody who's doing a deeper healing could help you get to the cause of that dis-ease in the body. And in each situation, it would be different. So I would say there's obviously a karmic. Why are some of us born into one kind of body and some of us into another kind of body? Some into healthy bodies. Some people live to be 100. Other people die young. Some people in childhood sometimes. In each case, it's a karmic situation. that, for a particular reason. There's no one rule about it. But I think maybe in the future, the general healing processes will go deeper into the emotional, mental causes that have created the imbalances in the body rather than just dealing with the symptoms.
And another question just about the future of the earth and practical tools, the farming, the soil, if you can speak about that.
The future of the earth. Huh. It's a bit, I think it's going to take a long time to clean up. I mean, there's so much that needs to be done, but I do believe it will happen. And again, this is a long-term process. It's the soil, it's the water, it's what's happening to the animals and the plants and our food. I think there gradually will be a waking up. I'll tell you one story that one of my experiences that affected me deeply. For many years, my organization has gone to the UN climate conferences. We don't do that anymore. We don't find it useful. But for many years, we went and we brought a small group of spiritual teachers, and we had sessions on the inner dimensions of climate change, the spiritual dimensions. This is a spiritual crisis in essence. Yes, economic, political, and all that. It's a spiritual crisis. So a few years ago, we were on our way to Poland, where the UN climate conference was taking place. And I had just come from Japan, where we had brought a young man to speak about the whales, because there's whaling in Japan. That's like an ancient thing for them. And this young man actually communed with whales, and he would take groups to listen to the whales. So I learned a lot about the whales during this session. So I was in Europe on my way to Poland for the climate conference when I had a dream. And in the dream, I was standing in my apartment, which overlooks the East River in New York City. And I was standing there looking at the river, and a large whale swims up the river and stops right in front of my apartment and looks up at me, and we made eye contact. And I said to the whale, "I hear you." And then I woke up. And the next day, I was at the climate conference. And I said, "Oh my God, I have to represent the whales. I'm here to represent the whales. I had made a commitment to the whale. I hear you." I went to every session I could on the seas, the oceans, and there was not one mention of animal life. They had in one session all these experts speaking about the tourist assets of the countries, countries on the oceans, how their tourist assets were going to be harmed by the rising seas. And I said to myself, this is what's wrong with our species. We don't think about anybody else. I mean, we think it's our Earth to do, but we share this planet, many of the species, and the whales are an intelligent. This was about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, and that dream has stayed with me, and since that time, I have felt my connection to the whales. And can you imagine what these conscious species are going through when their seas are being destroyed the way they're being destroyed, the oceans? So much ocean life is being destroyed. The whole temperature, the whole, what do they call it? The movement of the water is changing. It's going to affect us, of course, but it affects so much more than us. And so I do believe that there will come a time when there'll be a shift, and it can happen overnight. When the meditating community is large enough, it's growing. And I don't mean people meditating for 10 minutes to do stress reduction. I mean those who are seriously meditating in order to transform our behavior, transform ourselves, the world. When that community is large enough, overnight, everything can shift. And that's where I feel I need to put my energy, because that's my space where I work. There are other people working on specific aspects on soil. I mean, there's so many issues. There's the depletion of the water. There's the toxins in the soil. I mean, there's so many issues. And there are people, you choose which issue that you feel you can contribute the most to. My feeling is it's about consciousness change. People have to become aware. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels, putting band-aids on. Consciousness change. And what brings about consciousness change? It's meditation. So to focus on getting more and more people to undertake a serious meditation practice for the sake of creating this collective. So a lot of my thinking has been the individual and the collective. How do we impact the collective? Well, we can't think, we have to think in very practical ways. We change ourselves, we're changing a piece of the collective. Somebody else changes, that's a bigger piece of the collective. So we all have a responsibility in that. And so let's change our consciousness.
I have two very, very basic questions, so I apologize for that. The first one is I'm from America, so as Christian, we were not thought about reincarnation and past lives, but I really resonate with that. But my basic question is, how can we explain the people, the population growth, or the souls? I mean, if the souls keep coming and coming through a body to live an experience, so why is the population increasing so much?
The animals move up the ladder as well.
Okay, yeah, that's what are
They're
the
moving up
animals?
the evolutionary chain.
Okay, so that's the way you can explain that.
You know, in New York, where I live, you see children's stores being turned into dog stores with dog toys. I have grandchildren. Sometimes I stop and say, "Oh, that's a nice thing for my grandchild." Then I realize it's a store for doggies. And I've seen dogs in baby carriages. I've seen dogs with coats and boots in the rain. And I say to myself, well, are they preparing these dogs for human birth? That's what it looks like. Getting used to being treated like a little baby. Those animals that gravitate and live with humans are preparing themselves for that.
And my second question is, why if the Vedic history or the Eastern culture is so ancient and it's so wise, why is it that we have our time based on Christ?
That's a good question. And in my lineage, they are trying to now use the dates of the yugas. It's like 350 Dwapara Yuga, rather than dating it to that. So also people, instead of saying AD, BC and AD before Christ and after Christ, they say before the Common Era, BCE, after the Common Era. Instead of pinning it all on Christ. It's because it's become the Common Era, but I think there will come a time when we'll start to label our years by the yugas. So we're in this 300 of the Dwapara Yuga. When that becomes a generally accepted phenomenon, right now, we have to have a common framework. And that's the framework that we all use. But I think we should all be saying before the Common Era and after the Common Era, instead of pinning it on one personality.
So I just ask one question. I'm not much aware of these things, but I want to ask if you know currently who is leading the world, because I myself imagine that there are some kind of like this suras good and asuras which are not too much good. So whether you know or you can go, you can reach them, and if there are the negative sources like negative powers, so they are aware of their strength, that maybe we know that in a good way we can heal something what was wrong, but they also know that they can destroy it with their power. So what's the question? Whether like whether you know who is leading the world currently. whether there are the suras, asuras, and whether they are aware of their power.
Whether they're aware of their power. Well, I think, this story about the battle between the devas, the forces of light and the forces of darkness, is an eternal one. That's an ongoing struggle. And there are obviously negative forces in the world. Forces, how do you know the negative? They're divisive, forces that divide people, that are divisive, that are working against unity, that are working against the common good. They cause a lot of destruction. And then there are forces that are unifying, that are trying to bring people together. And there's always this struggle. But at the end of the day, the forces of unity prevail because the universe has to maintain itself. And this struggle, it's like you see when you take 2 steps forward, forces pull you to take a step back. 2 steps forward, a step back. Regressive forces. And some of it is by control, but for a lot of people it's fear of what's new. I mean, we feel that in the U.S. right now, a lot of fear. It's a lot of fear of, things are happening, things are changing so quickly. The world we know is disappearing, and we don't know what's ahead. Mhm. Yeah. And so we have to know that the forces that are destructive should help strengthen us and give us more conviction and work harder to bring the forces of light, to bring the energy of light, the knowledge, the unifying love. I mean, love is what, I've seen through my look at different stages of history that love is the power. I've just written a book on Tibet where some of those masters had the power to transform negative energies. It was through love. Their love was of such an intensity that they could dissolve the darkness, dissolve. There's one story of a yogini, Yeshe Tsogyal her name was, the consort of the great Guru Rinpoche. And she was a princess. She rejected all suitors. She went into the charnel grounds. She's a true personality from the 8th century. Went into the charnel grounds and stayed there for 12 years. And one of the things about her that touches me the most is she went into the hell realms to liberate her greatest oppressor. Sort of like Sita with Ravana. What does that mean, the hell realm? She went into the darkest mental spaces to liberate this man who had been her greatest enemy. That takes a lot of love and selflessness to do that. And that's been such an inspiration for me, knowing about her life. Left the life of a princess to go sit in the graveyards, to develop this capacity to liberate demonic forces, to liberate people who were carrying that anger and hate. They can be transformed. These forces can be transformed, but it takes a lot of not anybody can do it. I had a personal experience with a very, very dear friend of mine. He was a guru bhai, a devotee of my guru, and he got what he thought was a possession, ended up taking his own life. And a lot of his friends abandoned him, and I felt so helpless. I would talk to him, but I couldn't do anything to free him from that dark world that he had fallen into. And I said to myself, should I invite him to stay with me? I knew that I couldn't. I didn't have the skills, spiritual skills, to handle it. And so it takes a very advanced person to know how to dispel that darkness. But there are such people in our world today. They're not in the marketplace. They're not standing before thousands. They're more in hidden places. There are such beings who are working to dispel the destructive energies. And the more we can know that they're there, align ourselves with that work, be guided on where we can go, and aspire to be of service in that way, to dispel that darkness. I mean, it's a spiritual challenge. But there definitely are people in our world today who are controlling things, and we don't know who they are. but we know that a lot of destructive forces are being unleashed. A lot of divisive forces are being unleashed. And I can only think it's for our own growth that we can strengthen our commitment and our willpower to bring the light into the world to counter that.
Thank you so much. It's more of a comment. And of course, if it invites any reflection, I would love to hear. But yeah, what really reassures me in these moments is that you can't kill consciousness. Like consciousness never dies. So whatever's happening in this play of polarities, well, the Dharma will just keep coming back through different bodies. You know, it really doesn't matter. And it's not that it doesn't matter, but it's just the truth is invincible. With lands like Tibet, for example, like it's no coincidence that the lands of the Dharma are like oppressed nowadays, or the Holy Land in the Middle East is like trapped by this conflict. And like we have the spiritual map of India, which obviously is not like the current political map. But how I feel is like the Dharma lives in us, all of us who have a connection to these teachings. And like you, for example, shared about the past chapters of your life in Eastern places, and now you're embodied in the West. So I just wanted to share that kind of brings me hope. Yeah.
So we'll just end with a very brief reading about Rukmini. So this is the dancer at the end of her life. Most of you know the story of the Mahabharata. There was the Great War, and then Dwarka, the place where Krishna lived with his people, was a big earthquake, tsunami came and it was destroyed. And Krishna had already left his body, but Rukmini stayed to oversee that and sent a lot of the refugees out toward Indraprasth, which is modern Delhi. And this dancer, she's saying that how she keeps looking for Mata. She calls her Mata. She said she sees her sometimes in the shadows, and she runs over, and she sees she's not there. She thinks she sees her in the marketplace, and she runs, and she's not there. And so she says, I spent my last days walking through the quarters where the stone cutters lived and the murti makers, enjoying the dance and musical performances. And once or twice I was certain that I saw Mata, dressed in common clothes, admiring a beautifully carved piece of marble, or seated at a distance listening to a musical performance. But each time, when I hurried to where I'd seen her, she eluded me. No amount of searching would reveal her whereabouts, and I always found myself asking, Mata, I don't understand. Was that you or not? Then I would hear Anjali's words. Anjali was Rukmini's attendant. Then I would hear Anjali's words. She and Sri Krishna are continually playing with one another, appearing and disappearing. That is their dance together, and it is their dance with us. So the divine ones, we keep searching for them, and they appear in the most unlikely places. And later on, you'll see she goes searching in the markets and everything. She's not going to appear in a golden globe of light. She's going to appear in a very mundane place, and you might not even recognize her because she'll be disguised as a village woman or whatever. And so I think knowing that this is a cosmic play, and the divine ones are playing, the Shiva Shakti is a play between whether it's Shiva and Shakti, or Krishna and Rukmini, or Ram and Sita. They are playing with us to encourage us to search for them, to find them, to attune ourselves with their energy. So I think we are in this world, we have to serve it, but not to take so much to heart what's taking place in the world, knowing that it could all be dissolved and that we will leave this world and be in another world and not remember any of it. So it's this balance between being in it and not being in it. And I think that's a balance we all have to strive for. Does that make sense? Being in it,
But not of it, as they say.
but not of it. In other words, feeling the pain of the world, dealing with what we need to deal, but not being overwhelmed by it, not being consumed by it, just playing our role and knowing that there's a cosmic dance that's going on. The light and shadow is constantly in play together.